Okay, Randine.
Okay, well, what we are entering into tonight isn't a conventional discussion, nor simply an exchange of expertise, but it's more of a way of listening together, where we share in a field of awareness that gradually emerges between us. And so this kind of dialogue moves beyond six isolated selves here, not by dissolving individuality, but by allowing us to participate in something larger than our separate thoughts and identities. So rather than speaking from our habitual ways of knowing, we listen together for what wishes to emerge between us. So in Chinese medicine, we might say that Shen begins to resonate across the field, and that the heart is no longer experienced as entirely personal, but meaning arises relationally through resonance in our dialogue. So again, we're not speaking from expertise, history, or accumulated knowledge that is part of the field, but we're invited to speak from the immediacy of the living moment itself, from a shared presence. And what each person says adds something to the field. And another responds not from anything prepared, but from attunement. And gradually something begins to weave itself between us. And it's kind of like riding a wave that none of us owns, yet all of us are participating in together. So in this way, understanding isn't produced by any one person, but it's revealed through our participation. So what this asks of us is, it's simple, but it's challenging to remain close enough to the present moment that we can feel the subtle movements of the field, and humble enough not to impose ourselves upon it. And so there's a real intimacy to this that I think you'll feel as well.
Well, that's as good as an introduction as I've ever heard to intersubjective dialogue. And it is a perfect segue into, and very related to, the question we're going to consider tonight, which is, what is the nature of truth in a clinical context? We all spend many, 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 many years refining a philosophical worldview, a complex physiology, learning to look through multiple perspectives to be able to respond in the right way to what the moment calls for in a clinical interaction. And certainly intuition is involved, but that intuition is always a leading edge. For most of us, our intuition is a leading edge into an unknown, sitting on a groundwork of 40 to 50 years of cultivation, of learning to look through lenses, and then even transcending those, assimilating those lenses and transcending those lenses. And much like in an intersubjective dialogue where we're talking and all of a sudden there's an opportunity, there's a moment, something shifts, and we're all aware of it. We know that there's a potency, that that there's an emergence that's being catalyzed. Similarly, clinically, there are these moments that arise, and they can strike us as truth, but it's quite a different truth, isn't it, than that which we look for objectively, for instance, in Western biomedical sciences, where we can measure how much a bowling ball weighs to 40 or 50 decimal places and make a definitive statement that is a material truth. And yet we're working in a much larger context with some degree of objectivity, but a very profound subjectivity in relationship to waves of change. And so how do we know, how do we feel, how do we determine what's true? How do we determine what's so? How do we determine what's real? And what do those words even mean in the clinical context of the medicine that we practice? And I suppose simply it could be defined, well, what's the outcome? Does the patient have increased range of motion? Do they say they're feeling better? But it's a lot more complex than that, because people can say they're feeling better and we can know there are deeper processes in need of rectification. And at the same time, sometimes objective measures like range of motion, for instance, or a blood test doesn't change, but we see so many parameters that are improving. So how do we navigate that, and what's our experience of that clinically?
I liked your introduction because it leaves me with the question of, what is truth? And we've got, absolute truth, and the absolute truth is hopefully what we're kind of rooting and anchoring ourselves in. But then the relative truths, and, in clinical practice, this space between practitioner and patient is, kind of lends itself to the same thing that we're talking about here in this emergent field that can't be reduced to protocol or theory or facts or range of motion but there's something subtle but palpable that opens a deeper truth within the field that we develop. It's like cultivation. And so it seems like it's somewhere between an absolute truth and a relative truth. That's in the field between practitioner and patients, that we invite something that has been disordered to organize itself. And like a pattern kind of comes into view that is like a deeper movement beneath the condition that they're coming to us for. And it feels more like a revelation that can't be articulated.
I get the image of like one of those little tuning forks. There's kind of well, we can look in the domain of objective truth, but as Lonny was pointing out, we're kind of we're exploring an intersubjective truth, or a truth that's arising in the client and arising in the practitioner together. But I get this sense of like that absolute dimension that you were pointing to, there's a way in which that, in the context of evolution, that absolute, it finds its way into motion. It finds its way, even as its sort of own self, it's timeless and boundless and doesn't move, but there's no separation between that and then what is then unfolding. And there's something about being in relationship with someone when they're feeling disorganized or they're suffering or they're experiencing separation, that there's a kind of like a tuning fork thing that happens. There's a resonance where the client or the practitioner or both, they feel the hum of something that has a rightness in it. And like you said, it might not have words. It might come with words. It might be sort of words might be part of it, or insight or revelation. But sometimes there's just a sense of like falling into tune.
You speak of the intersubjectivity, Alexander, and intrasubjectivity as part of that experience. How can I, as a practitioner, hold space for the patient to drop the concepts? I have this, I have that. My labs show this, my labs show that. How do we get to the phenomenology of the real? And that reality, for me, is the essence of it. I can only have an engagement which makes a difference when the phenomena of the real is unveiled. How can I be that place where that becomes possible as part of the conversation? And how can I do that with myself as part of that conversation? And so it's a continual recursion of awarenesses and shifting perspectives, that moment of the shifted perspective is evidence of some form of a transformation in the other. And so this chi or vital current of life force that takes place has within it the power of that awakening to the truth of that experience.
Sometimes I find that once I start needling, something shifts, and then the client says the salient thing that needed to be said or needs to be said, it suddenly comes out, that it shifts the whole treatment. And sometimes I put the needles in and I'm in a deep place, and I ask the question that wasn't asked, that has nothing to do with even what the treatment was all about. And then I can shift the treatment. And it's almost as if the actual act of putting in the needle played a role in eliciting some truth.
like to Will, you had said, how can I do that with myself? Like there's something that seems to distort the field of somebody's truth not being recognized. And in this encounter, there's a quieting of the distortions of the lies that we tell ourselves. And in that quieting, there's an amplification. And I love pointing out that the practitioner has to be able to quiet their own noise and their own distortion in order that something unknown in that field can come forth. Because usually when it does come forth, I have no idea where it came from. Like I have to quiet down my very busy, knowledgeable, expert mind that knows all the things. And that's still there, but it's kind of in the background, it's quiet. And then when I can quiet that, then I can tune into what's wanting to emerge. And my quietness then tunes down their distortions or, whatever is clouding the truth in them.
Yeah, I mean, that brings to mind the classical text telling us, the medical text telling us, shut the windows and close the doors as a metaphor for meditation and contemplation, and the cultivational text telling us, shut the windows, close the doors, and a light appears in an empty room. And I know, in meditation, a very common experience, at least for me, is that there'll be activity and there'll be busyness, and then all of a sudden something drops away, and there's spaciousness and there's stillness, and something that reveals itself as, well, it's impossible to articulate. It reveals itself as so compellingly more real than whatever I had been engaged in. And the same thing happens for me in clinic when, there's the chit chat and the how are you, and this is what's going on, and now I'm going to take your pulse and let me see your tongue, and the person is saying what's been going on. And there can be a moment, what I always seek to do is tie together, to come up with a metaphor, to speak a metaphor, to provide an image, and that image can be an acupuncture point function, an herb name, or just some meaningful image that ties together the whole pattern the patient's been presenting, the symptoms, the attitude, the worldview they're looking through, and present an image that just ties it all together. And there are these moments where that lands, and all of a sudden, just like in meditation, everything shifts and everything gets quiet and everything gets spacious. And you just don't want to say another thing into that space. And we've hit those times during our dialogues here where all of a sudden we'll get very quiet, and there's a listening and there's a feeling, and we're in a new terrain, but there's a reticence to even want to cause a ripple in it for a moment because it's tender. And there's something that, while it's maybe impossible to articulate, it's just so compellingly more real and compellingly more true than what it's emerged from. And, those are the moments where the patient feels it too. You're in something together. There's a stillness, there's a profundity, the heart opens, and then all of a sudden there's lack of an inherent limitation. There's possibility. fertility for something new to happen, you know?
What's coming up as you're all speaking, I'm reminded of the Palace of Listening. And I think often we're trained in this modern time, maybe it's been like this for a long time, to assess truth based on the concrete senses. What can I see? What can I hear? But I think one of the deeper messages in the listening palace is a reminder that there are things that we can hear and we can see. When you close all the windows and the doors and then a light appears, you're seeing that light, but not with the physical senses. And you're hearing that inner hum of the Tao, but not with your physical ears. It's a different kind of knowing. And there's something here for me around finding those subtle senses that are sensing into that a different whisper, the truth of the resonating with the Tao, or resonating with some deep quality of unbroken wholeness or awareness. And it's a reorientation of what we're listening to. So it's like, to use that image, it's like you close the windows and you close the doors, and then you can see. It's like you turn the senses off, and then you can see, and then you can hear. And of course you can still see with your concrete eyes, but there's something else that becomes available in that different kind of music.
It's kind of like reggae music. I and I, Ramana Maharshi, pursuit of that question of who am I and who's this person before us, and that place of not knowing, the acceptance of uncertainty, the very uncertain state of the fragility of being, and that emergence has all around it, the signs that, of course, that's not the terrain, and deep in that terrain is where there's some truth there, and that's of course a relative truth, right? And how are you going to be an absolute truth in a relative scenario? And so perspectival truth becomes another matter.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate you naming the paradoxes of truth, because that's what I'm aware as I'm really listening. On the one hand, I listen and I keep hearing there's this some kind of connection that keeps coming through about truth and Tao. So just like I can't, the Tao that I can know or name, it's not really the Tao. And there's a certain way that the truth is also the truth that we're speaking of, transcends mental knowing or perspectival knowing. And it's a kind of You know, like I keep hearing, like as everyone's talking, it's like, "Thunk, we just got it." You know, and it's like whether you say, okay, absolute relative, just like, or you know, I and I, right? I love that I and I. We're in the room there, and I suddenly like boom. And there is something like you said, Lonnie, where we're just like, oh, you're just there. But then, see, I also keep hearing how we're chasing it. Like, and it's like, it's also like a trickster, you know, and it's also like this truth that's almost in the same way, like the Tao, you can't know it, you can't name it, but it's right here all over. And I felt like there's a both this alignment, like we say, like the truth is I'm aligned now. You know, all my spirits, my Shen and Shen, like my Yi, it's like, yeah. But then the next second, it's like falling over there. And then I'm like, oh no, I don't know what I'm talking about here. Or this, is the patient getting better? Or are they not getting better? You know, do the test results mean anything at all? So I think what I'm getting is that to hold both the truth as like that penetration of Tao into present, which is a that is that moment where there's nothing more to say. But at the same time, it's also this impossible trickster. It's Mercury. We can never hold on to it. And your truth, who's, you know, is it my truth or your truth? Is it their truth or which truth? And I think, Lonnie, when you say we're in a post-truth world, you know, the perspectival fragmentation has become so acute. The truth is just now in shards. It's, you could pick it up anywhere, pull it out of, you know, hold it up, and it's going to die right in front of you. So what we're looking at, I think, in this conversation is what is the truth as it's emergent in an integral awareness. And we're just learning what that is. We get it in those moments, Lonnie, like you said, where we're like, oh, it just came in. But then it's going to be gone again. It's going to like go back to being mercurial and a trickster.
But sometimes it isn't gone again. Sometimes, I mean, in my experience, there's a pivot where the universe changes, where my world changed, or where a patient's world changes right there in the treatment room. And that person will never be the same again. They'll never be able to think about their history in the way they had thought about it previously. Something was said, something was acknowledged where they saw through how they had been holding something their whole lives to reveal the constructed nature of a groove, or the constructed nature of a prison they were living in, or a view that they held, that in one moment defined everything and had for so long, and a moment later just went poof into thin air, and they're never going to be able to go back to that. And well, I think this has a lot to do probably with the absolute and the relative, but there are certain things I've seen in my life. There are certain things I know to be true that are like the stake is just in the ground. I mean, for instance, I know and am doubtless that the source, the path, and the goal is love, and that the context for existence is love. And I'm doubt that's not something that changes in my experience as a fundamental organizing, as a fundamental view that I have in the world. That doesn't shift. My relative disposition toward it can shift if I'm upset, but the fundamental view never does. So I do think there are some things we recognize that just become the foundational realities that aren't culturally conditioned into us and that we weren't taught by culture. They're truths that we wake up to that becomes self-revelatory and ever unfolding throughout the rest of our lives in waves. And I've seen that, I know that's happened for me, and I've seen that happen for patients. And I remember the moment where everything shifted and the patient knew it had shifted. And now it's 25 years later, and if I run into them, they'll bring it up. And they'll say, man, I've never forgotten what happened that day. Like that moment was a turning point. And there was truth in that. Like to me, that was like, there was a truth that wasn't relative. And that is sort of eternal. I think of it as eternal.
Well, it reminds me of something Will was speaking about earlier, the sort of orienting to the phenomenological aspect of experience. And there's the truths that we gather from culture and that we learn and that we sort of come up with in the relative sort of sense making that we're all participating in. But what I hear you speaking about is something else. It's a different kind of, I mean, I think this is what the word revelation is for. It's like it's like it has that weight to it. It's not even a revelation with words. The words come after to describe the revelation, but the revelation itself is an awakening to something that no one can talk you out of it.
Yes.
When it's been a phenomenological, you know, when those inner senses are resonating with some deeper truth. And then, like you said, there's no turning back from there because it wasn't like an ideal. Like sometimes I'll teach students and clients about wholeness, and like there's a point before they've touched some dimension of wholeness where they love the idea. And so they can take on the idea, oh, yes, like we're deeply whole at some place. But that we can be talked out of that. But there's something I hear you speaking about that you can't be talked out of it because it's known from somewhere that is a different place of knowing than the reasoning mind or the, yeah, something.
Well, I think we have the metaphor, in the Western tradition of Christ, seeing something that he couldn't take back and following it through to the end. And Buddha making a decision, I'm going to sit no matter how long it takes. But anyway, what you say, I think is right, Alexander, is that there is a truth we can wake up to, a revelation of self. And we'll mention Ramana Maharshi, who's so deeply rooted in that revelation of the self, capital S, that that self, capital S, or Shen, capital S, just becomes the context in which all relative phenomena occur. And there's this moment of coherence, at least for me clinically. Sometimes it's in a conversation with a patient and that thing happens, like Lorie went like, oomph. Where sometimes my fingers on a pulse, I needle a point, I go touch the pulse and I go, yes. There's just a knowing, a feeling of the wave of change, the presence of that wave of change, of that transformation in catalyzing something new.
It's like the spirits have moved. And there's something so sacred about it that shines through whatever was fragmented, whatever the shards were. And even though, we tend to focus on the what's wrong so that we can fix it, when that sacred shines through, it quiets everything else, because there's something in us that knows the sacredness more than anything else. That in the inner altar, the temple at the center, it rings with that resonance that this is more true than anything that I've ever seen or witnessed or heard or put my senses on, because it fundamentally changed not the things out there, but it fundamentally changed something even more me than me. And then I received it.
You know, that receipt goes to the stake that Lonnie's talking about. It's the stake at the root, where we take that stand of being, and that Alexander was talking about with respect to influences altering our state, our socially conditioned self, the small self, that which is defined by who we are and what we do in the world and all these things. But at the stake, the shall again, this is at the very bottom of the cycle, at the very root of the transformation past the gravestone. And that continuity to the bloodline is that which we actually have privilege of connecting with through the pulse. There's this sign to describe this, and I can find that, and all the things that can be written down. But in the end, I'm touching into a river of life that's been flowing through the veins of this humanity in perpetuity since the origins of this humanity on this planet. And that sacred revelatory, as you said, Alexander, revolutionary moment at the turning of the pivot, when that realization comes forward. And it can't be grasped. It can't be produced. It can be invited. And if we're in a place of acceptance, full acceptance of who we are and who the person is with us, that creates a possibility of that emergence of light with the spark within the source of creation. That connection becomes a possibility that we hold. And we hold it gratefully and graciously. It's a gift. It's a genuine gift. And it's a genuine blessing.
In listening to you, Will, and Lonnie, what you said, what I'm beginning to feel is so truth as a kind of ground of being. Because at first I was like, okay, when do I know the truth is in the room? Say in the treatment room, it's when I'm say already, I'm thinking something about the patient or about, say, a dream that they've shared with me, and I'm getting the dream speaking to me, but I'm not saying anything. And then they come back and say, it's this, it's, I need to speak to my, I don't know, just something. I need to speak to my boss about this issue. And in my body, that same thing. This person needs to speak. They need to speak about the issue. And at that moment, when that synchronicity happens, that was my initial thought. How do we know something's true in the room with a patient? And one of the ways for me is when those coincidences, those seemingly impossible, like there's no way they know what I'm thinking and I don't know what they're thinking, and yet we're both thinking the I and I thing. Well, so that was my initial thought, and I'm listening. I'm like, okay, is that one? But now as I'm listening, I'm beginning to feel that it's more that truth is the ground. It's like and coming back to that idea, it's not us pointing to truth. It's not us pointing to the moon. It's somehow that direct experience. Whoops. As you're saying, the phenomenological encounter that then changes everything, but that it's always there. It's the very ground. And what we're talking about clinically is, like you said, Vasanti, sometimes it's just putting the needle in, that then the ground reveals itself through. And it's that touching the pulse that kind of got me clued into this, because we touch the pulse and you're touching. There's nothing between you and the blood itself, like what's pulsing through. It can become more true, almost like after the treatment, you're like, oh, yes, it's deepening. But we're simply touching what's always, and that's kind of newly emergent for me as I'm listening.
Yeah, and I think that deeper truth, one way I think about it, Lorie, is in terms of the unconscious and the soul and the soul's curriculum in a life. And often patients are trying to reason things out and make choices. A typical one is, should I stay in a relationship? Should I leave the relationship? And what I've always done is guide, and they make a list. It's like buying a car. Well, this one costs this much, and this one gets this gas mileage, and this one has this warranty. And the mind is trying to figure, and I point deeper toward contemplation and ask them to just sit with, is this relationship right? And if it is right, then anything you sincerely engage to improve it will make it better. But if the relationship isn't right, then there's no amount of therapy that's going to do more than just wind up in a negotiation and compromises and sort of create a hell realm. And I found that many people are actually able to drop the mind, if not right there, go away between treatments and sit deeply with the question, to invite the unconscious to begin to reveal like their deepest heart's knowing about a course. And then we can sort of work with that and what's coming up. And there can be like a deep recognition of truth by just not trying to figure out, but just inviting the soul and the heart in silence to just speak to them, and making that room and just making room and having them just make the declaration, show me what I need to know. If there's anything I need to know, let me know. And just create empty space and sit with it. And oftentimes they've emerged with a, like come back with a much more profound clarity than when they were just trying to like figure out what to do.
Yeah. In hearing what you were sharing, Lorie, what comes up for me is a sense of there's the ground that you're describing, the ground of truth. And then, there's a way in which at some point the relative self can either be in resonance, recognizing that the relative self is an extension of that ground of truth. And then there are other moments when we sort of fall under this spell of fracture, and our relative self isn't it's not in resonance. And that's where, what I think Lonnie is pointing to, that starts to help that resonance occur when it's not present. Because we can have a relative self that is disconnected from that ground of truth and make all kinds of decisions. Some of them might even be good decisions, but like Lonnie said, it's like a pros and cons list rather than a deep, because there's times where it's like if you do the pros and cons list, like staying in the relationship seems like a bad idea, but the actual true move is to stay in the relationship and work it out. And then there's other times where it seems like staying in the relationship is like obviously there's more pros than cons, but that's not in resonance with the deeper movement.
Yes.
And so it seems to me like in the context of clinical practice, it's like we're often helping our clients or our patients um, explore how to find that resonance with that deeper note. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to what you said, Vasanti. It's like sometimes you don't even say anything, but if your insertion of the needle in the point can open up that to open to what is the ground of the fiber of the moment, then that what you're both talking about becomes accessible, not the pros and cons list. And that, of course, we see a lot. I mean, that's one of the beauties of the treatment space and the needling, the spirit point that's gonna make that change, like you said, Lonnie, that they never will never turn back from. And I've had that experience myself, and I've certainly witnessed it with patients. I think the thing that I'm still kind of interested in, but I'm beginning to think what I'm talking about this mercurial, that there's also an aspect of truth that's mercurial, that's mutable. But I feel like what I'm beginning to see, like you said, Alexander, it rises up from that ground and then it takes infinite multiplicities of form. But the shape of the oak leaf and the shape of the tulip and the shape of the bluebird, it's still truth in its own. It's expressing in this
Well,
amazing multiplicity.
it seems like that multiplicity you're talking about. I mean, if we really look into that and include the whole cosmos, even if we just include all of humanity, I mean, there's a lot of wild and wonky ways in which,
Yeah,
and it
exactly.
may be in resonance with this ground, it may not, but at some point also someone's living from a truth as if it is the truth. I mean, that gets reified.
Yeah.
However we say what it's resonating with or not, or whether it's cut off from wholeness or not, it creates a reality that we all have to be in relationship with. And I think that's the mercurial, that's the wild and wonky perspectival, holy smokes, there's like a lot of perspectives that are occurring all at once
Yes,
with very real co-emergent realities for all
exactly.
of
That's
us.
what I was kind of trying to get at. It's like we know it. And then, I mean, but I liked what came when you were speaking because it was like out of that ground that the ground, as you say, whether it's the phenomenological direct encounter through touch or the pulse or being present with another person to that, so that truth. And there's this ground, but then there's also the way it takes these infinite forms and can be seen in an infinite number of ways. And what do we do with that? What do we do with that? Because there's a reason why the trickster god has been around forever and ever and ever, like in every culture. Like every culture knows there's truth. And then there's also the trickster, but it's not like the trickster doesn't have their own kind of truth. But that could be just simply absolute and relative. I don't know. I'm just feeling into what's happening here with that. And they're both, of course, present in the treatment room. That's the thing. And they both need to be somehow held within the space. Like, I don't think we can just say, oh, well, all that relative list making and not knowing who you are and wanting to know who you are and thinking you have to go back to graduate school. You can't just say, oh, well, that's not truth somehow. I mean, it's tempting to say that. It's nice to be able to say that, but I don't know if that's, I don't know how clinically effective it is.
You're muted, Will. I see you saying things.
Yeah.
Along those lines, Lorie, is that trickster is because it's oscillating, right? It's what experience of truth am I having that I'm obligated to share or not? And where do I sit with that? And how do I identify with it? And how does that fit with the contract that I've negotiated with this client and what their expectations are? Because if my experience of truth transgresses that, then I'm in a different world, and I may have been engaging some truth, yet the social and moral intelligence was insufficient to sustain it in its proper container for that moment. And so along those lines also of this, the nature of oscillating truth is the idea of similitudes and antipathies, right? Am I going to give some herbs that drain fire for a person who's got quite a fiery temperament, right? That oppositional force versus the similitude. And that's, as time goes on, I just want to get coherence between heaven, human, and earth. And how do I find that? Where do I see it? And where does it come about? Because then all of a sudden, now the risk of the transgression has diminished tremendously because it is completely coherent.
Lorie,
So
you're
to me is amazing. I mean, I'll get granular. I work with this young woman, and like she's a teenager. She's like an older And I'm constant, like for years, and it's been years, and I'm not trying to get her to feel it, come down and trust. Come and listen. Can we take a pause? And what are you feeling there? And all she wants to talk about is her food problems. Like I can't stop eating, and I think I'm fat, but I'm not fat. I don't know what to do, and I don't know when I'm full. And I'm like, oh, calm down in your body. You could learn when you're full. And finally, like one day I caught that, I was having an antipathy to going to the level that she really needed me to go to. Like when you say, I, in a way, through my wanting to go to that deeper ground of truth with her in that moment, I forget the word you used, Will, but it was like what's the word you said? I was in some way almost not meeting her in what could be true. Even though, like, I think this has nothing to do with reality. Her obsession with her food trip. But I needed to go, like, it's changing. Like, we're making some headway. If I just stop trying to, invite her to come down and come to the deeper truth. And like I'm meeting her in this place that to me seems very mundane and like we're on a hamster wheel, but it's changing. So I guess, when we talk about it in that clinical way, or even in our humanness, navigating the relativity of it, as we know also, I suppose the absolute is one of the clinical, like if we're going to say strategies around truth, or at least that's what's emergent for me.
I mean, what's interesting for me, like when you're talking about that, one of the things that's interesting is just what I mentioned in the introduction, is just the difference between truth in a sort of Western scientific fixed sort of way and truth when it comes to surfing waves of change. Because when you're talking about, yes, there's an absolute, and according to the absolute view, all that's going on in her mind and in her body is kind of like habit and craziness and very relative. And you can see from an absolute view, not real compared to like her deeper potentials.
Of course, yeah.
But then there's a wave of change through the relationship and through many treatments over time, where there is a truth to the engagement and to what's happening that's unfolding. And that's a kind of truth riding through all of it.
What I'm getting, Lonnie, as you're speaking, is that in a sense is, and of course, this is the domain where I spend much of my time, which is the psychological truth, which is kind of in between the absolute and the relative. And what I find, and I love what you're saying, because yes, those waves, and of course, where a person is in their own development, I also have to be willing to meet in the truth of where they are in their wave. Also, at the same time, seeing her in where, in the fullest expression of her beauty and wisdom and potential, which I, of course, do see. But it's like my wanting her to go there now is actually interfering with. That was where what you said, Will, really touched me. If I'm insisting that she's not where she is, because I can see where she could be. That's what I was trying to
place
say.
her behaviors and patterns are coming from is pre-rational. So talking to her rationally about it is just like trying to explain to an 8-year-old with a flashlight that there's no monster under the bed. It's just not the level of medicine.
And there's something so kind and loving about being able to go into her relative, that you're being asked to get her out of, but to go into it with her, to say, like, I'm here with you. And then you bring that truth into her illusion and somehow change it because of that, instead of asking her to step into something that she can't.
And there's also the truth of your care.
Yeah, that like crawls into it with her, that I'm here with you, even though it's not your reality. But the love is that can go in there and change that fragment, change that distortion, instead of pulling it here to the great reality.
It's kind of like respecting what is. And so sometimes it's that, okay, they're unwinding what is up for them, and I'm just breathing in and out through my nose, right? And so I become aware of breathing in and out of my nose, and all of a sudden I'm in this realm of acceptance and respect for who they are and what is, and that's the truth. And the truth isn't some other place, but maybe it is. Sometimes it is. Sometimes we can point to a sign along the road and it changes a life. Can we be open to that moment when it occurs? But it's easier to be open to that moment if my nose is breathing.
I like what you said, Will. My practice is based on respect, and I keep that. I respect whatever it is that the patient is saying is truth for them, and also having this idea of mutual nourishment. It allows me to um, open up to something else, and the pulse for me is key, the Shenhammer pulse, because as you said, it's a connection to the lifeblood of someone else and to the Shen. It's a Shen to Shen communication, and Dr. Hammer used to always say that the pulse wants to reveal something, and in taking the pulse, the patient's Shen is able to communicate something to my Shen, which we understand at some maybe non-verbal level, or maybe having the vocabulary of the pulse diagnosis allows for me to come up with a pathway to open up to other possibilities. But I do feel that respect has a lot to do with it, because sometimes you don't know whether the person's telling the truth, whether at a very basic level or not. But I feel I want to give them that the respect of non-judgment. Are they telling me the truth about this or that? It's their reality, and I try to have a non-judgmental view and accept them as they are. And everybody wants to be seen and heard, and somehow that allows for doors to open.
Well, it seems like that the ground that we were talking about before, I'm not aware of anything that is as free as that dimension of being. And if I'm anchored and identified with that ground of freedom, I'm I'm at ease with any expression, any relative expression. And then we can bring in, as Will was pointing to, there's various therapeutic responses. You know, when is challenge the medicine, and when is moving along with, moving along with without offering any opposition. You know, I'm in relationship to some teenagers, and there's time when opposition isn't the medicine, and there's other times when it is. And so, we have allopathic approaches, we have homeopathic approaches, we have all these different, it's the beauty of Chinese medicine. It's like there's so much perspectival fluidity and freedom of, thousands of years of um, human beings coming up with ways to help each other. And, we can have different systems that at some level seem to even contradict each other. But I think in this era, it becomes a palette of choice making around from that ground of total freedom, and from that place of looking through, trying to see through the eyes of the other person, at least a little, as best we can, and then determine what would be the truest response. And it might be something that's in disagreement, or like, with Alexander's relative self and how I see the world or what I think, but does it open the moment and come back to that? I had this image when you were speaking before, Lorie. You should create this little thing that people can buy for their treatment room. It's called the Lorie Truthometer, and it's this little thing, and it just goes. It can, like, it figures out when, like, truth is happening, and it just makes that sound so everyone knows. But sometimes it's like it happens in the strangest ways. It happens like you're describing, where you go with the client, you're like, let's talk about food. And then all of a sudden it was like that was the thing that had to be, like, unraveled a little bit. And then all of a sudden the shrunk machine pops and something transforms.
Yes, sometimes talking about things doesn't help. So we get acupuncture and we have herbs that can really take the wind out of the sails of a pathology and create the space then for change and for images to arise from the unconscious and information to come up in dreams, and for information to come up to a person where talking can then be their time and a place for talking. So it's a beautiful part of our medicine. Sometimes talking about things and engaging with them just inflates their apparent reality and reaffirms the illusion of them being a problem. I mean, how many times does a patient come in with a vision like this and something seems so real, and then you treat possession or you drain aggressive energy or do whatever you do, and you come back in the room 15 minutes later and whatever seemed so compelling is just gone? And what just came up for me after saying that was just, on the one hand, there can be profound revelations of truth, and on the other hand, there has to be real humility. I mean, we can get inflated with truth. There's a power in it, even when it is true. And it's the humility allows for even that to change, even that truth to change. Well, does anyone else have anything to say? Or maybe we did it. Feels poignant, potent, doesn't it?
Yeah, I love it when the words die down, but the field just speaks louder.
It's just a feeling of brightness and gratitude and appreciation for all being together.
I would say one of an awareness as we are just together. It's interesting to be in this space together, the six of us. I feel like there was something about the moments where we spoke to the pulse because we all know it. You couldn't necessarily say that in just, but there was something about that truth that we all know. Putting your hands on the blood.
It's so interesting in pulse because, of course, there's all this theory, but that can drop away. And so, because I did for 36 years of my career till the pandemic, I did a 40-minute pulse diagnosis on all new patients. And what was always interesting to me is beyond all the theory, now and then a voice would just say, ask this question, which had nothing to do necessarily with where I was on the pulse or any kind of information I had been taught to find there. That a voice would just ask, and you'd ask the question and often get answers that were just shocking. Like did your mother die in the last 2 weeks? I mean, I never learned a pulse quality or position for that. But a voice would come up and I'd ask, and sometimes I'd have a trepidation, but I learned to know which voice to trust. And then I'd just go with it and I'd ask, and the person would look at me shocked and say, yes, my mother died 10 days ago. How did you know? And I didn't know. I know now. But there is a deep mystery to it.
What's the place that I find that the intuition is the loudest? And often there emerges some sort of myth or image or picture that isn't like, okay, you have a wiry pulse and that means you've got liver cheese. It's like, a grove of trees will appear with, whatever it is, and I'll share that image with the patient, and it will mean something to them that it does not mean to me. But there's something about it that I don't know, brings the hun, maybe brings something about the imagery that it evokes and the stories that can be told about it that have meaning for them.
I think that, as we're kind of coming to a close, but I feel like the thing that's really touching me the most deeply as we kind of move to the close of this conversation is that we're not talking about an abstraction. That's what really is landing in me, because at the beginning I'm like, what is truth? What do we talk truth? But as we keep going deeper, I keep feeling like we're coming more and more to a direct encounter of something that it's like because through the pulse we're touching the life tissue itself. That ground, that and
Right,
the
right.
touch of it feels like
Yeah.
where for me
It's
the
not an
truth is.
abstraction.
Right. That's what's really
Not, it's
coming.
not, and that's what scientific truth is derived of abstractions.
Yes.
And so it's, we're in the phenomena, the field of the phenomenal, the the lit field, the luminous phenome is it's the realm, and that feels to me like the truth that we experience is a shared privilege here. You know.
There's a union, which is real, beyond all the abstraction.
A oneness.
What did you say?
I said a oneness.
Oh, well, yes.
Yes.
Well, I think we did it. Sure. Well, to all our listeners, we hope that you're appreciating and enjoying the dialogues, and we look forward to sharing this with you and hearing about it from you. We will, everybody. So